Now Hobby. This is the Conscious Cannabis podcast series. Stepping a little bit out of my comfort zone here, so bear with me. I'm with my friend Alex, and we're going to be talking about conscious cannabis today, and all things considered. Let's start off with where we are. I got a little bit to say about, the land we're sitting on, and so do you.
Absolutely.
So let's do that.
Yeah. Well, currently we're sitting on the home of the Ganjier campus, which is a cannabis sommelier program, so an education program for cannabis. But as you well know, it was for many years the training center for Dr. Young's martial arts academy school.
Martial arts training center.
Retreat center.
Yeah.
Totally. And so it serves a similar yet very different purpose today, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. What are some of the operations, and when people come, and where are they from, and what maybe can someone expect if they're like, finding this through like searching Ganjier or something.
Totally, yeah. So the Ganjier program was started by a group of people that we refer to as the Ganjier Council, which is a group of individuals, and really Derek Gilman was who led it, and he's the one who owns this property as well and kind of manages the program. So it happens throughout the summer, a couple times basically monthly, but with a couple classes each month in that time. And so people come from all over the world. We've been really blessed with this gorgeous international community of people because of the nature of the way that Ganjier was marketed, which was very peer-to-peer based on the council's individual relationships, following, etc. It's allowed a spider web of a reach all over the globe. So we've had people from all over the United States, Germany, Thailand, all over Europe, Australia even. We have a number of Ganjiers in Australia, which has been pretty cool. And one of the really beautiful things about that is we get to bring some of this intention into these emerging markets throughout the globe. And so there's some places like Australia that they're not going to have to go through some of the growing pains we did here in California with types of extracts or ways to bring some of these products online. When people come, they are able to stay here on campus. So we have 6 cabins here, as I'm sure you know, that the people that truly want to immerse in the experience are able to stay here. I'm the chef here. And so I kind of take it upon myself to curate their experience after hours and make sure any additional educational goals are met in that time, any other experiences. Cannabis is, when it comes to educating about cannabis, it's unique because you can't avoid experience. Without the experiential aspect to it, your understanding is always going to be limited. There's only so much that you can read in a book about it. And that's not that you can't memorize an entire book about it, but we run into 2 things with cannabis, and it is kind of an interesting mirror to Qigong, which is it has not been given space for scientific study in a legitimate way. So most of the scientific study that's happened around it has been either skewed by ill intentions or skewed by whoever financed that, because it's been mostly done privately at this point. So other than a lot of the really wonderful anecdotal evidence that we got out of open sourcing in the medical days, this new world of cannabis science, it's mostly coming from corporations and companies that are leading that science and pushing it in a certain direction. So as much as we can read about it in a book, there's a lot missing there. And there's a lot that we can gain experientially from it, from our own individual movement around it, that would be very difficult to teach in a book, but also it hasn't been passed down that way. The best cannabis farmers I know, it's because of their relationship to the land, to the plant. Learning it is, it's more about learning how to have a relationship with something than it is learning the bones of that thing. And so this space has given that really beautiful opportunity to bring people a little deeper in to that relationship, give them space to interact with the plant, to interact with a place that has held the plant in a special way for our modern times, really. So like when we talk about modern day cannabis, Humboldt has held that genetically, energetically, in a pronounced way compared to a lot of places. And so the ability to bring people here, give them space to fully immerse in that, fully be themselves in that, share what is important to them in that, and not be alienated in whatever way they might be in their home life, is has been really like a beautiful thing. And the healing that has come from it has been, for myself, really important and divine, because and as you've brought up, like, there's a nervous system adjustment that has happened with cannabis, and I think holding these spaces where you are fully safe to express yourself in that way, it helps with that nurturing. And it's things I've heard from people that have come through, from ex-Secret Service agents to pilots and people that have worked in jobs where they either couldn't engage with the plant at all for that time but wanted to, or had to in secrecy in some capacity, and it's given a space where especially those who were not as quick to risk their lives for so many years, but wanted desperately to engage and wanted the healing that came from engaging with the plant. It's been beautiful to see how that space has been provided, and what has come out of the energy of homogeneity of language. And that's been kind of the other thing of, like, we're all very lost in the language of cannabis, and Ganjier has helped us curate similar language so that we can communicate with one another more effectively.
That's powerful. I was just thinking, there's so many things, as easy as I can pick up this moss, I think it's called usnea.
Usnea, yeah.
Yeah, which is medicinal.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As easy as I can pick this up, as easy as nature can provide that, and I can pick it up and take it inside and use it, it's not like that for the cannabis plant.
No.
Right? So there's a whole spectrum, I think, of like perspectives that people have. If I were to hold a cannabis flower or a seed or a joint, right? There's all of these ideas, maybe assumptions, memories that people have, and I guess I'm assuming, well, in my case, someone walking into a room with like a bag of nuggets, right, or a joint or something like that, you already layer on an experiential sort of lens,
right,
that society sort of says this is not okay.
Yeah.
Right? So as easy as like you can walk into the room and prepare this, for like a tincture or something like that. That is, that would be probably a little weird, maybe maybe witchy or something like that, right?
Well,
but or medicinal, right?
Totally,
right?
yeah.
Or maybe shamanic or something.
Absolutely.
Right? But with the cannabis plant, like I said, the social layer,
right,
because of the legality, adds, as you said, as you alluded to, the nervous system sort of, complex, and the idea of risk and the notions of risk.
Yeah.
So you touched a little bit on it. I guess it's hard to say, what we want to talk about is conscious cannabis, right? And so for me, what I'm conscious of is, because of the ramifications, the legal aspect.
Yeah.
Probably for a lot of people, that's really like the only thing they can be really conscious of, aware of, alert to.
Right.
It's like, if I get caught with this or that, or driving or flying or something like that, it's like it's over, sort of
Totally.
thing. Um, and as you said, experientially, in a way that sort of cuts you off. It cuts you off from the experience, from I don't know, from lineage. I would say from nature, cuts you off from spirit.
Totally.
You know, uh, how do we wrap our heads around that? How do you guys wrap your heads around that? And then how does this program, this space, and how does it tend to and lend itself towards maybe those efforts, if that's kind of what you guys look at or not?
So I'll answer that from both perspectives, both my own and kind of from the Ganjier perspective. So first, I'll sort of throw like a line in the sand so we can define two different terms. And so if we're putting conscious cannabis on one side of that line, I'm going to put commodified cannabis on the other side of that line. So it being treated as a commodity, legal or illegal, is what's led to that mentality, right? So what's really interesting about the criminalization of cannabis is that rhetoric, although for the consumer, it created a lot of like barriers to entry, and also this inability to touch it in its completeness. So we did generally get exposed to it as, here's a bag, here's a joint, here is a finished product. And what led up to that, we didn't get to know that. And what led up to it karmically, we didn't get to know that either. Or in terms of what was actually physically used in it, a lot of times not regulated. And so we did get this different relationship to it. But if you can look at criminalization as both things, right, as positive as and negative, because all things are, it also created this insane skyrocket of price point. So if you happen to be in a place where there was comfortability around cannabis, like maybe Humboldt County, you were able to make an absurd amount of money off of a very small amount of plant material. So you use usnea as an example. Part of why it's a different kind of weird, let's say, because for me, that's something I would totally do, is just go grab some spruce tips and make a little tea and make a tincture, and I try to gather from nature all the time. So it's commonplace in my life. It might be witchy in another person's life. But the reason why it's not stigmatized the same way is because that little ball of usnea right there really has not, in our modern times, I don't know, the history of usnea, that has never been worth $150, right? Where there have been times where a little bag of weed that big has been worth $150, or maybe even more, depending on your market. And so that creates a very different relationship to it in terms of who is drawn to it. Where for me to be drawn to usnea or to the plant medicine that surrounds us everywhere, it has something to do with like how I hold space in my life for those things, and me looking for something better or different, or less systematic for myself. Where with cannabis, there was this artificial period of time that was created where it was sought after because it was such a strong commodity, and it created this mentality of cannabis that it's synonymous with money. And so whenever you're talking to people in cannabis, you do tend to get these two relationships. Is it this personal relationship, or was it a capitalistic relationship? And everything in between. And then I think on the other side is like this holistic relationship that you get with the farmers here. That's like it was a personal relationship. It was on some level their way of getting away from capitalism. So it was a capitalistic relationship, but in a way that liberated them from some of those things. And so it was what created support in their life. It's what allowed them to live truthfully in themselves in a way that made sense. And so on the one side, you maybe got fancy cars and all the things and all the LA things and all the helicopters and the things that people do with a lot of money. And then on the other side, you have people building homes for themselves and, creating little safe havens of their own for themselves and their community and investing back in community. And it became this beautiful blessing in that way. And for me, that is one of the things that I try to look at in the cannabis itself, in where it comes from, and in how I'm engaging with it is like, is the root of this cannabis money, or is the root of this cannabis a human being, right? Like, and a relationship between the land, that human being, and that plant, right? And I think that does tend to be what defines this line in how we're engaging with it energetically. In Ganjier, we're thinking much more about the consumptive aspects in terms of what can be, what is consistent, right? So we look at the like data of it so that we note where it comes from and how it's grown. And then we look at the appearance, the aroma, the flavor, and the experience. We kind of break those down into different sections and look at how is the cannabis expressing itself in these different areas. Because it's very important, and this really is like the most important part, is that with an education system, it can't be alienating. So on the one hand, we keep this very core value system of promoting the farmer, of bringing Humboldt County to the forefront, of having sort of this like very pro-sun-grown, pro-regenerative farming mentality, while also bringing in the elements of the real world and holding space for anyone that comes in, because the goal of it is to be able to educate anyone from the average consumer that loves what they're doing and wants to deepen their relationship with it personally, to a corporate executive that's looking to bring more of, maybe it's not seen as mindfulness at first, maybe it's just seen as information and expertise, but throughout the process mindfulness comes. And we've seen it quite a bit where people that come in from those environments, they tend to take something back to those environments and try to implement some of this depth of resonance. And for me, cannabis is an amazing plant because it rejects consistency. It wants to change. It wants to adapt. It likes stress. And so to get it to express experientially in its best form is not necessarily synonymous with consistency.
In terms of conditions of growing.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Or even selection, right? And so really being able to understand that adaptation and have that conversation is difficult. It's difficult in a corporate world where everything needs to be structured and the same. And so Ganjier has given a space to really talk about those experiential aspects, because all of the science and things that you put on paper don't change how we experience the joint right now. We can't change that. We can to some degree, but there are parts that are beyond that we need this reflective process. And it's something we have in many gustatory.
So let's take a little second, right? Because there's probably a lot of people who are looking to step into the space, maybe to invest or to start farming or to have a dispensary, or waiting for legalization or something like that. And I'm thinking, like proprietary information, something that your brand can express right through the product. So I imagine because it can't be a consistent product, that's going to be hard to invest in, I guess, on paper.
Yes and no. Okay. So, yes, I would say so. And I think that's, when you talk about, it is hard to figure that out when it comes to smaller farms and smaller, the micro business license is really nice to me because it keeps people relatively small, and that way you can take care of everything really, really well. But basically, modern cannabis has moved towards homogeneity. And that's why in
Define that.
creating homogeneous products that are all the same, right? So
Even to different strains, different brands.
So, like, and here's what I mean by that. There are a couple different places where homogeneity is coming into play. One is genetics. So the way that we're breeding has been narrowing the scope of what genetics are available. So even though we look at all these different names, genetically, in terms of like the actual genome of the plant, we're getting less and less actual variety over time. And so you might maybe have heard like someone saying like everything's gelato now or everything's cookies now. That's because there are certain traits that tend to take over genetically when you cross with them, and it will steer towards that over time. So you wind up with a lot of similar profiles that are recognizable. And part of that is because we're selecting for similar looking buds so that it looks the same in the jar, right?
That's part of that consistency.
As part of that consistency, but also because in a lot of states we've moved away from being able to smell the flower in the store.
Oh yeah.
And so it's a closed jar and all you can do is see it. And we've because of marketing through Instagram and through really from like magazines all the way to the internet and how we've perceived cannabis, these like very beautiful bud shots. I call them like gem mine conventions, because you'll literally be farming these crystalline structures of buds so they look good in a display case at a competition, but they smoke like cardboard. So
How's that?
it's it just has to do with the nutrients they're being fed and like the environment, but like terpenes and the flavor compounds in cannabis, they're like secondary metabolites that come out when they're stressed. And so like outdoor produces that a little bit more readily. Indoor, that is taken care of in a less systematic way and has a little bit more like human interaction. You can really like move it in that direction. But when you're really creating consistency and driving down costs, a lot of times you lose out in flavor and experience. So you're steering towards appearance and maybe some aroma, but you're losing out in those other categories because you're not necessarily looking at that portion of it, or maybe you are and it's just you're trying to fit an SOP.
All right, so let's talk about. You're saying it's all moving towards a homogenized product. Let's talk about the history of the plant for those that don't know. I mean, it goes by many names.
Totally.
Right? What are you guys saying that this plant is, where it comes from, its genetics and its breed and its path from its roots to where we are today?
Totally. So I am not a historian, but Ganjier does do a pretty good job of teaching the history, and I highly recommend anyone who's really interested going through the course and checking out some of the work, especially the late French Cannoli did, kind of mapping that history of cannabis. But very, very simply, it originated in China and split off from hops. However many years ago, they were originally the same plant, and so it genetically split off, and it was carried throughout the world, Europe, to via the Silk Road. So like a lot of other seeds and spices, it was really treated like that for a long time.
How would it be carried, you think, in all forms? All kinds of forms?
So, and I forget the word. There's a type of plant that it refers to plants that follow humans, that the way that they have evolved is through human spread, and that is that's their survival.
Interesting.
And so cannabis is one of those plants. And so people, we ate cannabis before we smoked it. And so it was like a food source. It would get fermented. And there's not a lot of information when you look like in ancient China, there's not a ton of information of exactly how it was consumed. And I'm digging into that information now because it's been fascinating me.
Cool.
But it was originally eaten. First the seeds and then like...
I'm thinking like the leaf. raw leaf or something, or even the flower?
Yeah, even the flower. I mean, if
Roots? I don't know.
probably less roots, probably like more seeds at first, and then like into like buds and flowers and that sort of thing. Obviously, I don't know for ancient China, but I went to Jamaica when I was younger, and I remember I was just talking to our taxi driver, who was like driving us around, and she noticed that everywhere I went, I was just asking people about weed, So she was like, "Hey, you like smoking weed?" She was like, "We don't smoke it. Like my family doesn't smoke it. We just eat it, and we just stir fry it. So we just take a couple nugs and we throw it in a pan with our stir fry in the oil, and we just fry it up with the oil, and then we eat it,
Oh, interesting.
And so just like toasting it in the oil kind of extracts it. So we get very like into our modern view of cannabis, and you touched on it a little bit earlier with the usnia, where we get caught up in like it's a bud, it's a joint, but the truth is if you know what you're doing, you can absolutely just go to a cannabis plant, break off a big cola, break off a couple of leaves, and go make a tincture with it. Go dry it out a little bit, make a tincture with it. Some are herbs, obviously you need to dry to do that anyway, but you can make a live tincture with it as long as you know your water ratios. Will you get the psychoactive effect that we talk about? Depends. But will there be nutritive components? Yes. Will there be flavor components? Yes. Will there be like medicinal components? Absolutely. Juicing raw cannabis is a beautiful way to consume it as well. So there are different ways to interact with it culturally, and you can imagine that at first, likely how humans interacted with it was they went to pick the seeds to eat them because we knew we could eat seeds for protein. And what we did, we got resin on our fingers, we got sticky resin, and then we went and we ate that resin, or we got it in our food when we were cooking, and we realized, oh, we like this stuff. This is fun. And so I think part of it, and when you look at these things anthropologically, some of it is just like, how might we have interacted with plants when we first saw that plant and we were figuring out, like, what does this plant do for us?
I love this question. I always try to trace back. What was the first experience of man when they were like, as you described, interfacing with the plant in some sort of way? So for me, being on this land, hiking and connecting to the forest, there was always something that would catch my smell.
Totally.
I have memories of bay laurel.
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
Totally.
There's something in the forest that I smell, and I can't exactly like find it. It's around here, and then when I found it, I was like, that's what it is.
Totally.
And it's such a, it's a brain sort of experience where you don't know what it is, and we have these minds and brains, and we need to figure out, problem solve, and then go to it, and then start interacting it. Yeah. Smelling, tasting, right, and just like ingesting, and I can imagine some sort of experience.
Totally. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit now about the experience, as you said. And one of the things that I've come to learn actually recently is in terms of education, I've gotten involved with experiential learning.
Yeah.
So there's like academic learning, and that kind of like, as you said, what's in the books, what's in history, what's written on paper, the words on the paper. And then there's the whole experiential learning, which is essentially like, I think what we think of is like life experience and like the lessons that life gives us, as we move through the decades and through our years, right? So how do you guys talk about the experience? And what's the need for conscious experience awareness with the experience of, and I imagine it has something to do with the legality and.
Yeah. So, and I'll split this question into kind of two answers too, and one will be the Ganjier answer, and then the other one will serve as like my answer, but also like maybe the Ganjier community answer, because of course these are two different things, right? The school and the student body are two linked but separate entities in most cases, because they have to be. So when we look at experience in Ganjier, we're looking at very simple teachable things for the most part. We're looking at duration. We're looking at onset. How long did it take to hit us? We're looking at, did I feel uplifted in my head? Did I feel relaxed in my head? Did I feel uplifted in my body? Did I feel relaxed in my body? You know, the things that are consistent to note. And then in the SAP, which is the Systematic Assessment Protocol, so that's what we actually use to grade the cannabis. There will be one just overall experience number. So everything else will just be noted. We'll just note these are the things in the experience, and then we'll grade that experience. We then have the ability to give notes, right? And this is where it comes in from the individual. So I think within the community, there's, because you can talk about all these things that are concrete in experience, right? Is it an active high? Is it a relaxed high? Is it and obviously that could differ from person to person, but it is concrete within that experience compared to I really love the way that the flowers looked and how everything, you know what I mean?
Some a little bit more subjective.
Right,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
But there's a notes section for that. And I think many of us have things we're specifically looking for in experience. And sometimes that is something really concrete, right? So, people that work in tech, they tend to be driven towards floral or high limonene varieties, because they're things that will keep you focused, planted, and awake, right? You don't want to be falling asleep at your chair. You also don't want to be noticing all your little pains and aches and want to be moving and running around. It can't be physically energizing, but it needs to be mentally energizing and physically relaxed, right? So something lemony, something rather than maybe a jack, which would be terpenoline dominant and might be very energetic.
Interesting.
So it depends, and obviously it depends on the individual and how it affects them, but I think a lot of people are looking for effects like that. I think when you get into regular consumers, we tend to be looking for nuance, right? Because when there's a high consumptive load and you already have a high tolerance to THC, it's actually the very small things that change the experience. So for me, I don't smoke a lot of hydroponic cannabis because I find that it makes me more cloudy, right? So I'm not necessarily more high, but I feel less connected to what's around me than even if I smoke the same variety in sun-grown or regeneratively grown. I can feel it has a slightly different energy to it. Sometimes it'll even get me more high, but it'll be a little more grounded, a little more connected, a little bit more full of an experience. And I think these are some of the things that we know them when we know them, but we don't know how to talk about them yet. Where when and there's a ton of good cannabis, but when you have something that assimilates really well for your nervous system and for the people around you, you can almost relate in the resonance of the energy of that thing. Where if you and I share a joint and the energy of that joint is profound in one way, there's going to be an experience we're sharing there. And there's a unconscious understanding of sharing that experience through the way that we relate. And so, and I'll roll some up. This has been a variety that really stood out to me in that way. I was recording another podcast and we smoked some of this African Haze number 11 by Buddalero, and we just went right into flow of conversation. And it got to be 15 minutes later and we were like, oh, we're recording a podcast. I really love that.
So there potentially could be a weed for podcasting, you're saying.
Exactly, right. That it brings you into the moment. And we could tell that both of us were sharing in that moment. We didn't have to then we took a step back and we talked about that experience a little bit and noted it how we could intellectually, but the actual understanding of that experience happened first, right?
The feeling probably.
The feel, yeah.
And then the understanding. Maybe,
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's, I think there's like internal, there's like understanding, and then there's understanding.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
And I think I've worked in experiential education my whole life. So
okay.
I actually grew up in environments like that and worked in environments like that.
Got
That
it.
were more of like, take people to another country, immerse them in the culture there, do things that bring you into the culture there and allow you to interact with it, but then also record it and reflect on it, like documentary making or like farm visits or that. I remember in high school, like going up to the Andes Mountains and like farming the way that they did for like traditional quinoa and potato fields up on the mountains. And so those kinds of things, like even coming off that mountain, I understood within myself how people lived there, right? It gave me this understanding of the world that wasn't necessarily an intellectual understanding. I was a 16-year-old, on an adventure. I wasn't necessarily an intellectual taking notes and writing it all down and really processing it. But throughout my life, I've carried that experience with me and that understanding of this way to be.
It sounds like you walked in their shoes.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's a term, and maybe there is in Qigong as well, but like in Korean natural farming, which is like a form of natural farming that uses things from the area as inputs. One of the first tenets is approach it with a beginner's mind.
Okay.
So
like permaculture, observe.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Observe, empty yourself so that you can be filled by what's in front of you. And I think, to me, that's experiential learning. Is
Perfect.
like that ability to, before you light the joint, before you step in front of the plant, because experience with cannabis, we talk about this part, but it's every part, right? Like, people that are really into this, we get just as much joy out of picking the seeds, out of planting each plant. That there's a really great joke in the community, like weed isn't addictive, but growing it is. Yeah.
Nice.
That once you build that relationship to the plant, you can't disattach yourself from nature in that way. You've now seen the other side,
And it seems to be that case that maybe you're not really in control of that. If we've been naturally evolving, oftentimes we have to remind ourselves that we also come from nature and we're connected to nature and we're animals.
Totally.
So as the plant has evolved, so have we also evolved. And so I guess for someone, in a social setting to be like, well, yeah, it's like really spoken to me and like it's something I've adopted into my life, or it's like someone who could be like, no, I had to take the risk because I had to like be a part of it, had to be a part of my life, and I had to it felt like it was just a part of me. So I had to just say, whatever to the legal system, whatever to any sort of repercussions, and live, for me, something that spoke to me and be true, I guess, true to yourself. And that kind of goes to, I think, or lends itself to the endocannabinoid system. Totally. So I forget kind of what we were talking about, but maybe we should touch on that too.
Yeah. Well, I think given how much this plant has been marginalized, it's incredible how much we've pushed it forward in our culture. There are very few things that we do that way.
And whose culture?
Especially our modern American culture. Okay. And European culture and all over the world, right?
I can just say I smell that right here, from right here. It's,
very different, right?
Yeah.
American culture with it has been interesting because of our culture surrounding flower, especially.
Flower?
Yeah, so most
of flower and
right, yeah, most of the world is hash consuming. So when you look kind of like historically or like regionally, you wind up with high altitude areas with you know mixed climates, or you have like equatorial areas, and in the equatorial areas tended to be more humid. So like Africa could maybe be like an exception, right, where it's dry but it's equatorial. But in a lot of equatorial places, it's more humid, so hash making wasn't really an option. So they would ferment and eat the cannabis historically. In like high mountain regions like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, it would be there would be hash cultures, and hash has been what has been traditionally exported the most. We in America and Europe definitely too, like Amsterdam, the shops in Amsterdam, that kind of culture definitely had like some flower to it.
And I'm just
And
guessing that it's because it's a concentrated form and it's small, so you can
yep,
take
it's
maybe
way
more
easier
small
to
quantities. Okay.
it's way easier to transport.
I really know nothing about hash really.
Yeah,
I've heard about it.
it's so hash is the main constituent of the plant. So if you've seen like the shiny speckles on the
Yeah.
outside, that's hash.
Okay.
So they're trichomes. So it's a stalk with a little head on top, and all the essential oils from the plant are filled in that little head. So all the THC, the terpenes, the cannabinoids, they're in that head. And so really like what you're looking for is that resin. The flower is sort of a carrier for it. And so we use that carrier to smoke joints because we're a smoking culture in America. We love smoking. And so we really have that as like a backbone. And we also had a strong culture of indoor cannabis. And so hash was actually, and I just read a book from like the 1960s that defined hash. It was originally defined, and in the definition was plants having been grown at 5,000 feet elevation or higher. And so, and that's not how it is in modern times. We make hash out of plants that are indoor, outdoor, everything. But we really had a flower culture in this country of like really nice flower. And so we've pushed that culture forward in modern times in a totally different way. But it has, and we've had pockets all over the world that have held this in criminalized environments. But America has been an interesting, like, melting pot of that, and we've had this kind of select legalization that has happened. So it's interesting to see how we've done that with this plant. We haven't done it with other plants. We could do it with the coca plant. There's no reason why we can't be growing coca under lights inside, but we're not. And the coca plant's an amazing plant. It's a highly medicinal plant. In its raw form, it's less addictive than caffeine, so it's not really that bad for you. And in countries where it's consumed like a superfood, basically, for altitude sickness. So like when I went to Peru, they were serving it in all the hotels in Cusco, just in the reception area for altitude sickness. Incredibly useful plant. Very criminalized. We're not growing it under lights in our house. Why is that? Right? Like, and we love that drug too, right? Like we do. But there is something about cannabis that once we touch it as individuals, there's this resonance of like, this isn't going to hurt me. And there is this, for me, it's like, it's that embodiment of the divine feminine where like, you feel so held by it, you want to hold it back. And I think like, for me as someone that went through that in Prohibition, there was this spiritual aspect of like, oh, I'm okay with committing my life to this. Like, if I stand by this, and I stand by this within myself, and so I'm willing to stand up for it in whatever situation I am. And for me, there is a relationship that's spiritual of like divine protection of like, as long as I'm always representing you in a way that is in alignment and isn't out of greed or isn't out of, then you'll protect me too. And so like I go back to that idea of like, for me personally, it's a relationship. I treat it like a relationship with a spirit, with a divine entity, with a woman, with whatever you might want to call it, where I try to be there for it as much as it's there for me, because it was something that saved my life.
Okay.
And so like it's something that I've treated as a close friend more so than a substance I'm using. And that it's why I try to spread education about it. I try to engage with it in every way possible that isn't just I'm taking from you, but trying to say, how do I give to you, have conversations with it of like, am I contributing right now in a way that benefits you in this world? And move through it from that like core value. And so that's sort of been my relationship to that. And I maybe got off a little bit as well.
Yeah. That's perfect. That's great. I think that really sums up, for you, a personal, conscious advocacy, conscious interfacing, and conscious consumption, right? It's interesting because, and I guess a lot of people, we don't really question, I mean, maybe with smell and color or taste or whatever, we don't really question, well, why am I using it? And maybe for people it's like, oh, because it makes me feel better. But now you have these nuanced attributes, as you say, that you had an experience where this sort of helped to facilitate a podcast, interview.
Yeah.
And it could be something like an artist painting, a musician playing music, a singer singing. It could be maybe meditating, right? I wonder too if evolutionarily the practice of sitting still in stillness was also married with the use of not just maybe cannabis, the plant, but other substances around the forest. It's just
Well, I think if you break apart the narrative about cannabis, right, and maybe you could go broader than cannabis and say like psychedelics in this statement, but for the purposes of this, cannabis, and you break down the narrative of like, it makes you dumb, or it makes you unfocused, or it makes you lazy, or it makes you bad at planning, and you start talking about that in terms of the frontal lobe, right? And so you talk about frontal lobe development, and we talk about frontal lobe development in cannabis, right?
You guys talk about that
In Ganjier, not necessarily,
okay.
but that does tend to be like,
in circles.
It tends to be one of those scientific questions, medical kind of things of like, and there's a lot of this in cannabis where it's like, are we ready for the narrative to shift fully? So, right now in cannabis, we generally accept like, maybe smoking a lot when you're younger is going to interfere with frontal lobe development, that sort of thing. Personally, and I'm not a doctor or a scientist, and we haven't really gotten that far with studying this, but I would say it has more to do with behaviors where like if you're continuing to do frontal lobe training, which is a lot of what school indoctrinates us for, if you continue to do frontal lobe training regularly while consuming cannabis, it will not affect that, but lifestyle choices will affect that, and cannabis can affect your lifestyle choices if you don't know how to respect it.
Frontal lobe, just define frontal lobe.
The part of your brain that's responsible for like planning and like it's the part that's developing when you're younger, that's like there for like cognitive reasoning and planning and like structure, right?
Okay.
It's also the part of your brain that turns off when you enter the flow state.
Interesting.
So when you enter a true flow state, you're not thinking about what's going to happen or what just happened. You're not thinking about how you look. You're not thinking about like your inexperience, right? Flow and experience, those to me are very similar concepts. The word play is one I use a lot in there, where like when you're in a sense of play, you're not thinking about the past, you're not thinking about the future, You're just in that organic play state.
And some might say in the moment.
In the moment,
Okay.
right? And we relate this to being childlike because children do not have a developed frontal lobe, so they're able to enter that play state immediately.
Right.
And then we spend our whole lives trying to get it back,
Yeah.
right? And just get to that same place of peace that we remember when we're young, that we're just able to be and flow, and there's only the soccer ball and nothing else, or only the thing that we're imagining and nothing else. And
I
think,
liken it to a state of awe.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
also.
definitely. And I think cannabis can help us come back to that place where I think there can be this, and it can do both things, right? Sometimes cannabis will bring you all into your frontal lobe. You'll be all nervous, all just trying to plan, organize. It'll almost confuse you in it. But if you can release to it, you can let go into the experience. Then a lot of times you can find a sense of flow, and that's one of the really damaging things about criminalization is that idea that you might get arrested or you might get screwed over in some way from consuming this plant. And the fact that it takes you into more of a flow, organic, vulnerable state. Now you're met with this idea where you can't be vulnerable. Now you're at odds within yourself because you've chosen a path of vulnerability internally, and you're met with a social construct that absolutely rejects it. And so it can cause anxiety. And so that anxiety is what a lot of people think of when they consume cannabis. But when you're out here, and there's none of that, it's much easier to envision that flow, you know? And I think people, you know, if maybe another way to let people could look at it is like if you're really physically active and you run a lot or you bike a lot, sometimes cannabis helps you get in the flow of it, right?
I've
Where
experienced that.
if you're not physically active, it can make it feel twice as impossible to go do something.
Interesting.
Right? Because you're not acclimated.
You're not used to.
Right. So it's not going to bring you into that flow. It's not going to force you into a place where you can run 10 miles.
That's why I would suggest if you were to consume cannabis, do it with something or do it in an activity that you're already acclimated to doing or used to doing. It's predictable.
Yes.
So and by that way also safe.
So we talk about that in Ganjier as set and setting. So, and this again, I would say that it just goes to anything vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cannabis is one of those things. Psychedelics is one of those things. But also just like, you know, talking to a close friend, right? Anything that is a little bit deeper than on the surface, it can be important to be mindful of where you are, what your surroundings are. And I think that because we in our modern lives, and we're so blessed out here to be kind of removed from a lot of it. But for me, when I wasn't, you know, a lot of these other activities, you know, for me, I really loved rock climbing. So it was, when I would go and focus on that, it would be a way to escape from all the other things, right? We take these activities as our little safe havens. And so being able to incorporate cannabis into those places we already keep safe for ourselves, we already keep as our little, you know, oases
Our
of
passions or our hobbies.
exactly,
like that,
yeah. And, you know, passions, hobbies, and then also relating to our animal selves, right? Like we are a cluster of nerves and neurochemistry, and the idea that we can maintain adequate health, mental health, and like overall functioning without engaging in certain things might not always be true, right? I know I'm a person that needs to stay physically active or it affects how I'm living, right? And I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah. These are concepts and ideas that already introduce the idea of consciousness, being conscious, a conscious person, a conscious living person in the world, human being. So there's a humanity, and the idea of humanity, the idea of relationship comes to mind.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate that you bring up the relationship part. That's something that I learned here on the mountain, the value of relationship, the efficacy of building relationship, the journey of relationship, the ups and downs, the and then the sacredness of relationship and the journey as well, and understanding the sacred relationship of this body to the earth, and then our spirit to the universe, right?
Yeah.
And this sort of aspect of like two as one, or two in one.
Well, and I think we have so many of these things, and cannabis is just it's been a really interesting one, because it can connect you to that no matter where you are.
Cannabis can connect you no matter where you are.
Because it always has its roots in the soil. So obviously we have this this idea of modern cannabis being grown indoors, and let's put that aside for a sec.
Mm-hmm.
But cannabis starts with where it's grown, the ecology of the area. And there's something that they talk about in tea, where like the tea embodies the spirit of the forest. It holds the spirit of the forest in it. And part of that is because of the microbiology of the forest, right? Like, so much of this energy that we sense does come from life. It comes from the bioelectricity that's happening in every little thing that's everywhere. And you can tell when you're in absolute sterility, right? Like, it's a different energy.
Mm-hmm.
And at its purest, cannabis expresses that as well. It has this really unique relationship to its environment. It is holding on to microbiology and like different things that come its way when it's not grown in a sterile environment. And we get to experience that. And so even if you're standing in the middle of New York City, it can have this magical ability to transport you to a tropical island or to the middle of the woods, and give a little bit of that blanket to you of protection and of natural protection. And I think it is, it can be, again, going back to the divine feminine and, Mother Nature, as it were, it can kind of act as this sort of like natural blanket in an urban world, of taking some of that spirit of nature and bringing it into your day-to-day in ways that like we can't always when we're bombarded by all these other energies.
Concrete jungle comes to mind.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah, very interesting. We're gonna close off this section here. We're gonna light this up, and then we're gonna talk about the experience, a little bit about the experience. But we need to check the time. We'll check the equipment, and then we'll spend maybe 10 or 15 more minutes. Got to look at the clock, look at the time,
Cool.
and then we'll see
Yeah.
where we're at, and
Sounds good.
experience it.
Beautiful.